When I pulled back into town after 6 weeks away helping my brother recover from surgery out in Montana, I expected overgrown grass on my property. Maybe a few stray mailers stuffed in the box. What I didn't expect, what made me nearly drive off the road, was a 3-story building sitting in the middle of my farmland. A hotel. An actual stucco monstrosity with a parking lot, valet booth, and a cheap plastic sign that read, Willow Creek Executive Suites managed by Willow Glen HOA. That's when my blood pressure officially hit critical mass. My name's Fletcher James. I'm 52, a retired Army logistics officer turned full-time beekeeper and part-time pain in the neck for anyone trying to mess with my land. I bought this 20-acre plot 5 years ago, free and clear, just outside the Willow Glen subdivision. Emphasis on outside. I never signed up for their precious HOA. In fact, I made sure of that when I bought the land, and yet somehow they had the gall to build a hotel on it while I was gone. I parked my truck so hard I left tire marks in the gravel. A woman in a perfectly ironed pantsuit with platinum blonde helmet hair came strutting out of the front doors like she was waiting for a red carpet. I recognized her instantly. Deborah Whitmore, HOA president and self-proclaimed queen of the cul-de-sac. "Oh, Mr. James," she said, with that nasal condescension that made me want to chew glass. "Welcome back. I do hope you're pleased. We've taken the liberty of revitalizing your property for the benefit of the community." "You built a hotel on my farmland," I said deadpan. "It's not technically a hotel. It's a boutique extended stay experience," she said, clasping her hands like she was on the board of some fake luxury brand. "And as you were absent for over 30 days, the HOA voted unanimously to repurpose underutilized land within community jurisdiction." "Community jurisdiction?" I asked, stepping closer. "This land isn't under HOA control." "Never has been." "Well, that's where it gets complicated," Deborah said, glancing back toward the building. "You see, we recently updated our bylaws to include surrounding parcels that directly impact the neighborhood's aesthetic cohesion. It's in Article 12, Section C. You'd know this if you attended our monthly meetings." I looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "I'm not part of your HOA, but your land borders Willow Glen," she said, like it was proof of ownership. I nodded slowly. "Right. So you thought my absence gave you the right to break ground and build a hotel without my consent?" She smiled like she was about to win a game she didn't know she'd already lost. "It's already built, Mr. James. The ribbon cutting is this Saturday. I suggest you embrace progress." I don't know what was more offensive, her tone, or the fact that she actually believed she could get away with this. What she didn't know, and what had me nearly laughing on the inside, was that before I left, I'd filed a quiet title action through my lawyer. Just a little legal housekeeping, tying up loose ends from a decades-old boundary dispute. I also had a motion on record affirming that Willow Glen HOA had no jurisdiction over my property. The paperwork was finalized while I was in Montana, filed, stamped, court-approved. They'd built their precious executive suites on land that, legally, they had no right to touch, and I had every intention of making them regret it. I didn't say another word to Deborah. Just turned, walked back to my truck, and drove straight into town, windows down, wind in my face, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Not from fear, from fury. A building that size doesn't go up overnight. They'd broken ground, poured concrete, run plumbing, wired electricity, and paved a lot, all without a single call, letter, or permit notice in my name. That told me two things right away. First, they'd forged something. Second, someone in the county office had either been paid off or was asleep at the wheel. I pulled into the county registrar's building, parked beside a rusting city utilities van, and walked straight to the records desk. The clerk on duty, Sandra, had known me since the day I bought the land. "You're back," she said, frowning at the dust on my boots. "You see what they did?" "I saw it," I said. "I need all permit filings for parcel 42B, construction, zoning, anything in the last year." She didn't ask questions, just typed fast. Her brow furrowed the moment she opened the file. "This is odd," she said, turning the screen slightly. "There's a zoning variance signed by you dated April 12th. Authorizes commercial development for hospitality use, but this isn't your signature." My jaw locked. Can I get a certified copy, already printing it, she said. I leaned against the counter, heart pounding in a slow, calculated rhythm. Whoever filed that forged my name. And if they did it with zoning, they probably did it with permits, too. Sandra handed over a stack of documents, 6 in total. Each one had my name typed at the top, and each bore a signature that looked vaguely like mine. If you'd only seen it once and were trying to copy from memory. I'll need these notarized copies, I said. And a statement from your office that I wasn't present for any of these filings. I can write that up, she said, and I'll make a few calls. This doesn't look good. It didn't just look bad. It was criminal. This wasn't a zoning violation or a nuisance complaint, this was fraud. And given the scale of construction, I was betting the HOA had used those forged documents to secure financing, contractors, and insurance. I called my attorney, Marcus, on the way back to the truck. He picked up on the second ring. "You back in Texas?" he asked. "Got in this morning," I said. "We've got a situation. Someone forged my name on zoning and construction permits, built a whole damn hotel on my land." Silence. "You're serious?" "I've got certified evidence from the registrar. And the HOA president just tried to sell it to me as a community enhancement." He let out a low whistle. "Well, they just handed us everything we need. Give me an hour. I'll get injunctions started and a cease and desist drafted." "You're still holding that court order from April, right?" "It's in my safe. Court stamped and sealed." "Good," he said. "We're going to box them in. Hard." By the time I got back to the house, Marcus had already emailed over the paperwork, 4 documents in total. I printed them, signed them, and drove straight to the county courthouse to file an emergency injunction against Willow Glen HOA, naming Deborah Whitmore and the HOA's treasurer, a man named Clay Roberts, as primary respondents. 5 hours later, I was standing on the edge of my field, watching a sheriff's deputy tape a bright orange stop work order across the hotel's glass entryway. Deborah came storming out, heels clacking like a metronome of entitlement. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, pointing at the paper. The deputy didn't flinch. "Per Judge Laramie's order, all operations on this property are suspended pending investigation of fraudulent permitting and unauthorized construction." "You're making a mistake," she said, nostrils flaring. "This is a lawful development." "Ma'am," the deputy said, folding his arms, "we have statements from the property owner, certified records from the registrar, and allegations of criminal forgery. Until this is resolved in court, no one enters or exits this building for business purposes." She turned to me, her voice dropping an octave. "You have no idea what you're doing." I looked her in the eye. "I think I know exactly what I'm doing." "And you're going to explain to a judge how you built a hotel on land you don't own." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She turned on her heel and marched back inside, slamming the door behind her. I didn't celebrate, not yet. There were too many moving parts, but I knew the next step. That night, I pulled out the wildlife cameras I'd installed around the perimeter before I left. I hadn't checked the memory cards in weeks. One by one, I loaded them into my laptop. The footage was damning. I watched as trucks rolled in under cover of darkness. No company logos. No signage. Crews worked from dusk until dawn, never during normal hours. They'd clearly been trying to avoid attention, which meant they knew they weren't supposed to be there. One clip showed Clay Roberts unlocking the gate I'd chained shut before leaving town. He didn't break it, he used a key. That meant someone had either picked the lock or duplicated it. Trespassing, breaking and entering, and conspiracy to commit fraud were just the beginning. The next morning, I walked into the sheriff's department with a flash drive and a signed affidavit. By noon, a detective named Carla Mendez had opened an investigation. "We'll need statements from any contractors you recognize in the footage," she said. "If they were misled or knowingly complicit, we'll pursue charges." "I'll get you names," I said. "Contractors talk. Especially when they realize the people who hired them lied about owning the land." That afternoon, I drove to the site again. A few workers were packing up tools under the watchful eye of another deputy. I approached one young guy, maybe 25, covered in drywall dust. "You know who hired you for this job?" I asked. "Some property management company," he said. We got a contract through Clay Roberts, said he was acting on behalf of the HOA. You ever see a deed, proof of ownership? He hesitated. No, figured it was all cleared. They had permits with forged signatures, I said. You've got a choice. Talk to the sheriff now or get dragged in later. He looked at the deputy, then back at me. I'll talk. By the end of the day, 3 subcontractors had given statements confirming they were never shown legitimate land ownership documents. One even had a copy of the original bid request on HOA letterhead, stating the land was community trust property. Marcus filed a motion to freeze all HOA assets pending investigation. The judge approved it the next morning. Suddenly, Deborah and her board couldn't access their general fund, their reserve account, or the project financing, which meant the hotel, half furnished and sitting empty, was bleeding money by the hour. But the real kicker came when the title insurance company reached out. I hadn't even thought about them until they called me directly. Mr. James, we're trying to confirm chain of title on a parcel involved in a commercial development. Your name came up. I'm the only legal owner, I said. That's what we're finding, the rep said, sounding nervous. But we issued a policy on this project. If fraud occurred, we're exposed to a multi-million-dollar liability. Then I suggest you start asking Willow Glen HOA some hard questions. They did. And within 72 hours, their attorneys filed a notice of intent to sue the HOA board for material misrepresentation. Now they weren't just facing criminal charges and civil penalties. They were staring down an insurance company with endless resources and a vendetta. And I hadn't even stepped into court yet. The county courthouse smelled like floor polish and old coffee. I sat on the bench outside courtroom 3, boot tapping against the tile as Marcus flipped through the folder on his lap. He didn't speak, didn't need to. We both knew this hearing wasn't just about a cease and desist anymore. What Willow Glen HOA had pulled crossed into criminal territory so completely, the courtroom should have had a revolving door for subpoenas. Inside, Judge Laramie presided with the same weary authority he'd had when I first met him years ago, back when I'd untangled the boundary dispute that originally cleared this land for purchase. He didn't look surprised when he saw the plaintiffs, myself, the state of Texas, and the title insurance company. And across from us, looking like they'd just realized the Titanic had hit something solid, sat Deborah Whitmore, Clay Roberts, and a lawyer wearing a suit 2 sizes too sharp for his confidence. The bailiff called it to order. Marcus stood. Your Honor, the matter before the court is a multifaceted infraction involving illegal construction, fraudulent permitting, and unlawful occupation of private property. We intend to show that the defendants knowingly bypassed legal ownership constraints by submitting forged documents to the registrar's office, zoning board, and various contractors in order to build a commercial structure on land they did not, and could not, control. Judge Laramie nodded and turned to the defense. Mr. Callahan, how does your party plead? The defense attorney stood, tugging at his cuffs. Your Honor, my clients maintain that this was a misunderstanding based on ambiguous jurisdictional lines. They believed, in good faith, that the land in question fell under the community's revised development plan, which, spare me the fiction, the judge cut in. We've reviewed notarized deeds, digital surveillance, and sworn contractor statements. That's not ambiguity. That's intent. The room went still, except for a faint clicking from Deborah's bracelets as she crossed her arms. Clay stared at the floor, cheeks pale under courtroom lighting. The state prosecutor leaned forward. Your Honor, in addition to civil violations, the district attorney's office has reviewed the evidence and is submitting charges for criminal trespass, forgery of public documents, and conspiracy to defraud. That got Deborah's attention. Her head snapped toward the prosecutor like she'd just caught a foul smell. Conspiracy, she said. That's outrageous. We were trying to improve the neighborhood. We didn't profit personally. You filed for a commercial tax exemption under a shell company registered to your husband's name 4 months ago, the prosecutor replied. That's not community enhancement. That's private enrichment using stolen land. Clay shifted in his seat, one hand gripping his knee hard enough to blanch the knuckles. The judge gestured for silence. "I'll allow preliminary arguments today," Judge Laramie said. "But this case is heading to full trial unless your clients are prepared to settle, and I suggest they consider that carefully." Outside, Deborah's lawyer pulled her aside, but she batted him off and walked straight toward me, heels echoing sharp against the polished floor. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she said, chin high. "You've turned the entire community against itself." I didn't blink. "You turned the community against the law. I just brought it back to the center. You don't understand what we were trying to do. Willow Glen needs development. We're losing value every year. That hotel was our anchor project for revitalization." "You want revitalization?" I asked. "Buy your own land, don't steal mine." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "This isn't over. There are still people in that neighborhood who believe in what we built. They'll believe it less when they find out how you paid for it, and they would because the next domino was already tipping." Back home, I'd spent 2 nights cross-referencing financial disclosures from the HOA's annual reports. It didn't take long to spot it. A series of wire transfers marked as beautification project funds, all in round numbers, all paid to a company called Evergreen Civic Partners. Evergreen didn't actually exist, at least not in any real commercial registry. But it had a P.O. box in the next county, and its bank account was tied to a trust in Clay Roberts' name. I turned it over to Detective Mendez. Within 24 hours, she'd subpoenaed the HOA's financials and frozen Evergreen's account. The next morning, Clay was arrested at his office. Embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering. The news spread like wildfire. That night, my phone rang with a call from a woman named Lacey Torres. She lived 2 streets over from Willow Glen, ran a local pet grooming business, and had attended nearly every HOA meeting for the past 3 years. "They always shut down questions about budgets," she said. "But people started wondering last fall when our dues doubled. They said it was for landscaping upgrades, but we haven't had a single new tree planted." She wasn't the only one. Over the next week, residents began organizing, calling meetings of their own without Deborah or the remaining board. I was invited to one. I showed up early, wore my work boots and a ball cap, and parked by the curb like anyone else. There were maybe 80 people crammed into a church auditorium. Some arrived with folders. Others brought receipts, old newsletters, even photos of construction equipment rolling through the neighborhood at odd hours. A man named Julio stood up first. "They told us the funds were being matched by a developer, but I called every firm in the region. Nobody's ever heard of a partnership with Willow Glen." Another woman, Bev, held up a letter. "This says we voted to approve the development, but I never saw a ballot. Did anyone here vote?" No hands went up. That's when it shifted. The room wasn't just angry, they were ready. They passed around a petition, drafted a resolution for full board removal, and scheduled an emergency vote. Turns out, even under the HOA's own charter, a 2/3 member vote could dissolve the entire board. By the end of the week, it happened. Deborah was removed as president in a landslide. The new interim board stripped her of access to HOA records and filed a civil suit against her for misappropriation of funds. The community even hired their own auditor to track every dollar spent over the last 3 years. But the building, the hotel, still sat there, silent and half-finished, a sun-bleached reminder of bad decisions and worse intentions. Marcus and I met with the insurance company's legal team on a Wednesday. Their senior counsel, a woman named Janine, laid out their plan. "The title fraud voids every contract signed under false authority," she said. "The construction firm has been notified that their lien is invalid. We'll be pursuing recovery from the HOA's bond and possibly their coverage under errors and omissions." "Can I tear it down?" I asked. She checked her tablet. "Once the court rules in your favor and ownership is uncontested, yes, the structure is unauthorized, you'll have every right to reclaim your land." It took another month. The court ruled in my favor without hesitation. The forged documents were nullified. The land title reaffirmed. And in the final hearing, Judge Laramie added a personal note to the record. This case reflects a disturbing trend of private associations extending their reach beyond legal boundaries. Let this serve as a reminder that property rights are not subject to community ambition. By the time the demolition crew rolled in, kids from the neighborhood had started calling the building Deborah's Folly. I watched from a folding chair as the first wall came down, dust flying into the late afternoon sun. It wasn't just demolition, it was reclamation. A few weeks later, I planted wildflowers where the parking lot had been. Bees came back first, then birds. The land was healing. And the next time someone from a homeowners association thinks they can redraw borders with a pen and a lie, they'll remember what happened in Willow Glen. Because they didn't just build a hotel on the wrong man's land. They built it on a trap and walked in blind. By the time the last beam of that illegal hotel hit the dirt, the only thing left standing was the community's complete disbelief that it ever got that far. Half the residents couldn't decide if they were more embarrassed or relieved. Either way, I wasn't in it for apologies. I was in it for accountability, and that hadn't fully arrived yet. I got the call from Detective Mendez on a Tuesday morning, right when I was loading fresh honey jars into the farm stand out front. "We've got something," she said. "Mind coming down to the station?" I locked up the stand and made the short drive into town. When I got there, Carla was already standing by the evidence board in the back, flipping through a stack of bank records. She motioned me in and closed the door behind us. "We've been combing through the HOA's financials ever since the subpoena," she said. "The shell company was just the start. It looks like Deborah and Clay were funneling funds through 3 separate entities. One of them was registered under a fake tax ID doesn't match any living person or business." I crossed my arms. What were they doing with the money? Some of it went to offshore accounts, Cayman Islands, Belize, even one in Cyprus. But here's the kicker: this development, it was a front. They were trying to inflate the property value of the surrounding homes, then sell them off before the fraud unraveled. We found emails between Deborah and a private equity firm in Houston. So the hotel was never meant to run. Not long term, she said. They planned to operate it just long enough to push comps higher, file inflated assessments, and then flip it all to a buyer group under a different LLC they secretly controlled. If they'd pulled it off, they'd have walked away with millions. And they did all this thinking no one would ask questions. Carla glanced at the board. They thought they could outrun the paper trail, but they didn't count on you coming back early. Or documenting every square inch of your land. She opened a drawer and pulled out a folder marked indictments. Grand jury handed these down this morning, 6 counts for Deborah, 7 for Clay, and we're not done. We've got probable cause to arrest 2 county officials who stamped those permits without verifying ownership. One of them received a payment labeled as a consulting fee from Clay's shell company. I leaned over the table and read through the list. Wire fraud. Conspiracy to defraud a financial institution. Filing false instruments. Money laundering. Tampering with government records. It wasn't just a bad HOA. It was organized crime in cul-de-sac clothing. Carla locked eyes with me. "You want to be there when we bring her in." I'd settle for knowing she doesn't get to play victim on the evening news. "She won't," Carla said. "We're arresting her tonight, quietly, no press. We already froze her accounts." She doesn't know what's coming. That evening I sat on the porch, watching dusk settle across the fields. The wildflowers I'd planted where the parking lot used to be were blooming despite the late season, splashes of yellow and purple swaying in the breeze. Just before 9, Carla texted me one word. Done. I didn't need more than that. The next morning, the town council called an emergency meeting at the civic center. I wasn't planning to go, but one of the interim board members, Lacey, the woman who'd called me weeks ago, asked me to speak. Apparently, the residents needed to hear what had really happened. I agreed, but only if I could tell the truth without watering it down. The room was packed. Not just Willow Glen residents, but folks from nearby neighborhoods too. People wanted answers. Lacey introduced me. I stepped up to the podium in my jeans and work shirt, no notes, no script. "Most of you know what happened on my land," I began. "What you may not know is how far the people you trusted were willing to go." I laid it out, the forged permits, the fake companies, the offshore accounts. The manipulated property assessments. I explained how they'd been playing a long con using the HOA's authority to legitimize criminal activity, hiding behind bylaws and board meetings while they lined their pockets. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. Silence carries more weight when truth fills the room. When I finished, no one clapped, no one moved, just a shared, stunned stillness. Lacey stood and took the mic. "We've already begun the process of restructuring," she said. "The interim board is drafting new bylaws that include mandatory third-party audits, term limits, and a clause requiring all development proposals to go through a public vote, not just a board decision. We're also filing civil claims against Deborah and Clay to recover lost funds." People started nodding. Some even looked hopeful. Afterward, a few folks came up to thank me. I kept it short. I didn't do any of this for applause. I did it because I had to. Because if someone doesn't stand their ground, power always creeps forward. A week later, the county prosecutor held a press conference. Deborah and Clay were officially charged under the state's Racketeering Act. The two county officials who'd rubber-stamped the permits were indicted as co-conspirators. Investigators found evidence of similar schemes attempted in 3 other neighborhoods, none of which got past the planning phase. Turns out, Willow Glen was supposed to be their blueprint. A test run. And they failed. The land, now cleared and quiet, was finally mine again in every visible and legal way. I sent a letter to the interim board, officially declining any offer of annexation or shared management going forward. They respected that. They'd learned the hard way what happens when you try to muscle people out of their own soil. Marcus and I closed out our final meeting over coffee at a diner off the highway. "You handled this better than most would have," he said. "I just protected what was mine." He nodded, then pulled a folded document from his briefcase. "One last thing, a reporter from the State Journal wants to run a feature on this, with your permission." I looked at the sheet. Headline draft at the top, "How one man unraveled a suburban scam." I shook my head. "Let them write about the system that let it happen. I'm not the story, the warning is." He folded it back up. "Fair enough." I left the diner and drove home, gravel humming under the tires. The sun was just starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the fields. I parked by the barn and walked out to the edge of the meadow, where the bees worked in quiet rhythm among the blooms. The ground felt steady again, not because justice had been served. Not because heads had rolled, but because my land was no longer under siege, and I had made sure it never would be again.